How long does it take to get a first impression of someone? 5, 6 seconds? We all rely on first impressions, but what are the stories we miss if we don't go further? What misconceptions and misunderstandings might we have if we don't go further? I have been loving Carolyn Keel's podcast, Beyond 6 Seconds. Carolyn interviews neurodivergent and disabled folks on her show, entrepreneurs, content creators, and advocates. As a neurodivergent person herself, Carolyn also shares some of her own life experiences on the show. She seems to know the exact right questions to ask to help her guests share personal stories that break down the stigma and bias around neurodiversity and disabilities. If you want to listen to stories that show the human spirit at its very best, check out Beyond 6 Seconds. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts and at beyond6seconds.com. Stick around to the end of the episode to hear more about Beyond 6 Seconds. The episode you're about to hear is part of our Season 2 series on family. Whether family of origin or family of choice, is your work a family affair? Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. On this show, we meet artists transforming lives with their work. When I was in college and studying film, I knew that my life partner would be another filmmaker, that we would hang out in the corner of our live-work loft where we did our editing, take cigarette breaks together, and discuss the direction of our film projects. And none of that happened. Not at all. Not even the cigarettes. I quit smoking decades ago. Nevertheless, I still have a lot of curiosity about what the romantic partner, creative partner relationship is all about. The documentary film, Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, tells the story of a group of kids who attended a camp for teens with disabilities in the 1970s, and then went on to become leaders of the disability rights movement. Crip Camp was co-directed and produced by Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht. Jim LeBrecht is a longtime sound designer. Lots of documentary filmmakers went to Jim for the sound work for their films. To say that Jim's friends in the documentary film world were excited about Crip Camp would be a major understatement. Not too long into the production process of Crip Camp, Sara Boulder, who is married to Jim LeBrecht, came on board as another producer. Sara has also worked in post-production sound on many films, and she had amazing fundraising chops. The two of them, in partnership with Nicole Newnham, were really a dream team for making a documentary film. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Listen and let us inspire you. James LeBrecht, who also goes by Jim, was born in New York in 1956 with spina bifida, a birth defect in the spinal cord that left Jim unable to walk. At the age of 14, Jim began attending Camp Jened in upstate New York with other teens with disabilities. It was at this camp that Jim and his campmates began to feel a sense of empowerment and independence. I was fortunate enough to see a 5-minute teaser of Crip Camp while it was still a work in progress. I saw amazing footage of Jim and the other teens at Camp Jened. I really expected to see a heartwarming story about an amazing camp. When I finally saw the finished film, my mind was blown. The story of the camp is heartwarming and heart-wrenching and so funny. But the story told in this film is so huge. It's the story of the activism and the fight for disability rights that took place in the decades following those summers at Camp Jened. The brilliant leadership of this movement can be traced back to these camp sessions, where a bunch of teenagers got a taste of how together they could affect change that would empower millions. Crip Camp was chosen by Barack and Michelle Obama as part of their Higher Ground productions. It won the Audience Choice Award at Sundance in January of 2020 and was nominated for an Academy Award. Nicole Newnham was unable to join us for this interview, but I'm so happy to talk to Jim LeBrecht and Sara Boulder about working with your romantic partner and the far-reaching impact of this documentary. Hi, Jim and Sara. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Could you introduce yourselves and tell us what you do?
I'm Sara Boulder, and I was one of the producers, along with Jim LeBrecht and Nicole Newnham of Crip Camp.
And I'm Jim LeBrecht. Nicole Newnham and I directed, produced, and wrote Crip Camp, as well as with Sara producing.
Well, both of you have worked in film for a long time. Can you give a little bit of your background?
I hope to be a documentary picture editor starting out, but for various reasons ended up getting into post-production sound. And I did that for a long time on documentaries and on a lot of big features. I worked at Skywalker for a long time. And I met Jim kind of via that world.
And I've been working in audio since I was a baby, but I've been a sound designer and sound mixer for 40 years. Started out in theater, being resident sound designer at the Berkeley Repertory Theater. Kind of glommed on to the people at the Saul Zaentz Film Center in Berkeley, became a sound effects editor and mixer a little bit and supervisor a bit there. And then I had my own company for about 25 years, Berkeley Sound Artists. And we really kind of focused on the documentary world a lot, really trying to bring high expectations around the quality and design of sound for documentary films. But having spent a lot of time working in documentary films and getting to know Nicole Newnham over the course of working on 3 of her previous films, about 6 years ago, I talked to her thinking that maybe she'd like to make some films around disability. And the idea for Crip Camp was one of those things, the last thing I kind of pitched to her over lunch. And that caught her attention. And then she asked me if I would work with her.
Oh, that's so interesting. I wanted to ask you about the background of this film. It's an incredible film in terms of the piece of history that really, I would say to many people, is unknown in this country around the disability rights movement. And it's also, though, your personal story in some ways. I mean, it's very much you are a part of this story. Did that feel, well, how did that feel? You've been sitting as a sound mixer way, way, way behind the camera for a long time, and suddenly you're going to move in front of the camera. How did that feel?
It was a lot of kind of the nuts and bolts of making a film was really unknown to me and something I hadn't done before. You know, shooting interviews on location and hiring folks. But Nicole and I crafted an extraordinary collaboration. And being someone with a lifelong disability, I was born with spina bifida and have never been able to walk. Kind of my understanding about the community, but more importantly, the story of Crip Camp is really about this camp, Camp Jened, that I attended as a teenager in the early 1970s. Camp Jened was located in the Catskill Mountains, run by hippies. And this was really a time of political upheaval, a lot of liberation movements and such. And, you know, we were starting to talk at camp about our own liberation movements. And so by being there and really kind of indoctrinated some of us about maybe there was something we could do to help. But to get back to your question, I kind of went off the rails here on you for a second.
No, it's great.
You know, I think that because it was a good collaboration and that we were hiring really well experienced people, that allowed me just to kind of trust in the process, trust in Sara, trust in Nicole, our editors and such. And it wasn't like if I had a strong opinion about something, I couldn't express it. But if I wasn't sure, I would just kind of like lay back and figure that more experienced minds were at play here. And in the long run, I just think that really worked really, really well. But you have to have trust. You have to have respect. And so I did have to change hats all the time. But there are times I'm thinking like a filmmaker, and then we're looking at a scene, and I have some narration in the film. And all of that was kind of spontaneous initially. And that we had a field recorder with us in the editing room. And sometimes so I would start talking about something and said, let's record that. Or this is really good. And Nicole would go away and write some narration, and then she and I would work on it and record it in another room. But all of it wasn't like we sat down and had a narration session, a year and a half after starting the film. This was constantly happening. And I think an interesting story is that we were fortunate enough to go to the edit lab at Sundance. And one of the things we did one day was, Crip Camp has got this incredible wealth of black and white video that was shot in 1971. We had about 5.5 hours worth of that footage. And as an exercise one day at the editing retreat, I just was spontaneously responding to some of that footage. I wound up almost in some Jack Kerouacian way, probably riffing and talking and streaming of consciousness for about 45 to 50 minutes, which we all recorded. And I don't think we used a lot of that in the final film, but it opened up this avenue of how we were going to approach the narration.
Right.
And I credit about 40 years of doing therapy on and off in my life to allow me to how to access my thoughts and feelings,
Right. Well, I just want to say, I want to come back to this archival footage, so help me remember that. But Sara, go ahead, and then I have a question for both of you after that. What were you going to add, Sara?
I was going to add that I think another part of that collaboration between Jim and Nicole was there was a real superpower achieved by having an insider and outsider perspective. The film, it wouldn't have been as good as it is without both of those things. And it was really smart that Nicole, realized she's not part of the community. And it wasn't just, she didn't want Jim just being a protagonist in the film, that they really needed both voices. And I think Jim benefited from that outsider perspective. I don't mean just in terms of experience level as filmmakers, I mean being outside the community. So I think that's especially given where we are right now with documentaries, where such an important subject as authenticity of the storyteller is being really looked at in a serious way, that there is a power there, because I think a lot of filmmakers are questioning, do I have the right to tell this story? I'm not part of the community. And I do think there is a power to that insider and outsider pairing.
Well, I do want to back up a little bit, because part of the reason why I am super interested in hearing your story is that you are husband and wife. And I want to go back, and you can say this is none of your business, but you were colleagues. How did the romance come about? What's the story there that happened?
You mean how we got together?
Yes.
Is this part of the art and healing aspect of your podcast?
Yes. That if you do art, you will meet your soulmate and get married.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the rule.
Yes, that's the promise that I'm making. Yes.
We were colleagues. We knew each other a little. We had worked on some of the same low to no budget films when Jim was making the transition from theater, and when I had just moved here from back east around the time I met you, Pam, a long time ago. And we didn't get together then, but years later we did. We re-met in the Fantasy Building, and it's, it was just good timing and the right people, and he's just remarkable. And also then I entered this world of disability, which I knew nothing about, through Jim. So my role, I thought, was to kind of keep in mind those non-disabled people who know nothing and get plunged into this world where they are, it's just mind-blowing. Like, oh, this busts every stereotype I had. The sense of humor is like on fabulous. The level of creativity from having to always jerry-rig everything in your life is really high. So anyway, I'll let Jim take it away from there.
Well, do you have anything to add about the romance?
I mean, I had bumped into Sara over the years. She was working up at Skywalker Ranch, and I'd be up there on occasion. But I always thought about her as being kind of this unique personality and fun person and attractive. But when we kind of got reacquainted, gosh, Sara, what is it, about 18 years now?
I've lost track. Yeah.
We always do this timing. Yeah, a mutual friend of ours, Patty Tauscher, who you may know.
Oh, of course.
The three of us went out to lunch, and then we decided that the three of us would go out to see a movie. And Patty bailed on going to the movie, but Sara and I went out, and I liked being in the world with her. And we subsequently went out, and we just had it's been a lovely romance and the most important thing in my life. And when we officially started dating, our friend Patty said, "Don't F it up," to me, which if you knew Patty, you could hear her.
I do know Patty.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I remember running into you guys, and I knew Sara better than I knew you at that time, Jim. And I always thought to myself, like, wow, she is such a good catch. And then I ran into you guys, and you were having lunch somewhere, and there was just this energy. And I was like, oh, like and then you guys said, yes, we're together, we're going out. And I was like, oh, yay, that's so perfect. Yes.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah. Well, so we can go back to talking about the film now, but I just had never really heard.
I really didn't expect
the story behind the romance.
I didn't really expect this question. I don't know if it was.
It just came to me that I really wanted to know because part of also what we're talking about is that being work colleagues and also being married, or being a significant other. And initially, when there was talk going around about you making this film, Jim, you were making it with Nicole, and then at a certain point, Sara came on as producer. And I'm so curious to know about the working relationship there. On the one hand, it's very handy to have someone who also knows film as your significant other, living in the house with you, and all this stuff. Were your roles really defined? Were you often sitting around, though, talking about creative things, or how did that work?
I think our roles were very well defined because Jim knew Nicole well. I did not know her well. It can be very dicey working with a husband-wife team. And Nicole had done that before successfully, but she was wary of it and she didn't know me. Mm-hmm. So early on when I talked to her about it, she requested that I not be the traditional kind of creative producer because she was worried about 2 against 1 and also kind of, too many cooks in the kitchen, because we also had 2 very hands-on executive producers. We had a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so I was happy for that to be the case. Jim and I would talk about the creative part of the film a lot. I think that helped, having defined roles. I ultimately found that a difficult role. And also there were challenges for me in that if I hadn't been married to Jim and I was a producer, and there were 3 of us producing, co-directors, I could have stepped in a different way when there were issues. I don't mean creative issues, but I mean, stuff comes up, it's very personnel stuff. And there's all kinds of, hairy things that can and do happen. But because I was married to Jim, that was not a viable role for me on those occasions. But otherwise, I think it worked out pretty well. I mean, what would you say, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, Nicole kind of expressed her concern, and, we heard her. And Sara was really, leading kind of the charge on raising funds for the film. I mean, Nicole had a great deal of experience, but Sara has had a lot of experience in development also. So, not really something of this magnitude before, but it just kind of seemed like we all kind of found our natural roles here. Certainly when it came to looking at cuts and the film, Sara would weigh in, as well as our other producers.
there were times when it was hard to get away from the film. I was working at home mostly, but occasionally at the Fantasy Building where we had edit rooms and offices, but we never had enough space. So Jim would come home and I would have been working on my own all day. And it's like, I just wanted to get 30 things answered and, and move things forward. So there were times it was a little difficult balancing the marriage, the relationship, and the film. And my role as, producer wife, it's a challenging situation no matter what. No matter what the relationships are on these teams, it's challenging getting a feature doc together. And then I'd say the pressure I felt ratcheted up when we started getting higher ground and more attention when it was clear it was being watched and that we were, we had the potential to really take it out in a big way. I felt more pressure, of course. But anyway, that's a good problem to have.
Right. And I just wonder too about, because you're producing a film for your spouse, does that also change the emotional stakes for you around the film getting bigger? Because it really did. It started off as this independent documentary, and then it became like this incredibly anticipated film.
I don't know what to compare it to. It was an incredibly gratifying experience. And yeah, there was pressure, but because of the anticipation. But I would say maybe Jim had more pressure because of feeling the weight of the expectations of the disability community on his shoulders.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I guess I think it still just comes back to respect and confidence in someone. And also, I was doing a lot of different things. I didn't need to kind of feel like I was like trying to keep a really close eye on producing on the things that Sara was doing. Producing was more about working with our crew and other things. So I had plenty on both Nicole and I had plenty on our plates. So in any kind of situation, this could be something that could cause a lot of friction or difficulty, especially when you're together. But it just wasn't the case. It wasn't like, there weren't some urgent things for us to talk about at times. And I would come home pretty tired or like, I don't think I can answer one more question. But I just, I think Sara and I have a great deal of love and respect for each other. And that's certainly played out.
Yeah.
The way we regard each other in a relationship, I believe, played out in our working together on this film.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Yeah. And then there was so much joy involved too, right? The excitement and the joy of like getting it out into the world and the Sundance premiere and all of that. So to be able to enjoy that together was really special. That was super special. And then the Oscars, the whole thing, it was just a very once in a lifetime special experience.
Maybe not once in a lifetime, you guys might.
But also, we traveled for the shoots and we went to visit with Judy Heumann a number of times in DC, and we're back east, and we had this infamous trip to Alabama that never made it into the film. But, there was a lot happening. And so I think what I'm saying is that, yes, we were making a film, but yes, it was also an adventure and something that we shared together and we went through together.
And that we still reflect on together, right? I mean, we're still reflecting on it because it was a lot to digest. That was all, as it was all happening. So we still reflect on it, on how incredible. And yeah, it's still something I think I know for myself, I'm still digesting the experience. And the film is still out there in the world, getting to a lot of places. So we continue to kind of be connected with the film and with each other over it. So yeah, it's a great joy. It's a great thing to experience together, all in all.
And the life of the film is that, it's been seen throughout the world, has had impact. A lot of screenings have happened independently that we didn't even know about in places. But we've heard about this Crip Camp effect in Hollywood, where the industry is starting to realize that there's more stories. There's more than just tragedy or overcoming a disability when it comes to stories around disability, that there's joy, there's sex, there's humor, there is anger and all sorts of other things. That's the human condition for everybody. And that we're not so, we're not, it's not just black and white. Yeah, but we're all shades of emotions and experiences. And so with the success of our film, I think definitely we've been hearing about people getting meetings and getting things off the ground, that I think we pushed things over a ledge that we were kind of close to. And so I'm always going to be thrilled about what our film achieved in that regard. And, about 3.5 years ago, I had started this, I had co-founded with a few other people, a group called Forward Doc, which is Filmmakers with Disabilities dash doc for documentaries. And it was like the summer of 2018. And it was at the Getting Real conference in LA that the International Documentary Association produced. And
Mm-hmm.
I had put together a panel on filmmakers with disabilities working in documentaries. And then we had a convening right afterwards. And we had about 30 or 40 people in the room that were disabled filmmakers or allies. And out of that, we were able to coalesce into a group of founders. And the organization is going strong. And in fact, just today, we hosted a panel with Reed Davenport and Keith. Oh my God, what's Keith's last name, Sara?
I'm just blanking out. I almost said Keith Richards, but obviously that's not it. I'm blanking out on his name. Oh my God, wait a second.
Keith Wilson?
Keith Wilson, thank you. Oof.
Oh my God. Thank you. So anyway, we're right at the end of Sundance, and they had a film that Reed directed about his experience of being disabled in the world, but it's kind of partially experimental. But I mean, we had about 80 people for this kind of panel with them, and then kind of a follow-up breakout session with our members and allies and stuff. And it was just like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
it's like, for so long, you feel like you're the only one out there from your community trying to do anything. And now there are people, and
Right.
we have resources, and we have community groups like ADOC of Asian filmmakers, or Brown Girls Doc Mafia, that, we really took our inspiration
Right.
from them. For me, I think Crip Camp lit a fire and was an example people could use and say, you can do this. So I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but I think that when we talk about what Sara and I talk about and what we're seeing, it's like reality checks sometimes. Do you see what's happening here?
Right. Well, I will virtually pat you on the back because I have to say, I don't know what rock I was living under, but I think I felt like I knew a lot about the Camp Jened part of your film. And I had no idea that the rest of the story. And I not only didn't know about it, that that's what was in your film, but I didn't know about it as part of our history. And so I think what you did was huge. I think most of us who either weren't from that time or we don't have much experience in the disability community just assume that one day lawmakers decided, hey, it would really be a good idea if there was greater accessibility. And I had no idea. And it was incredible. It was so exciting. Sort of like sit on the edge of your seat, exciting the story that you tell in this film.
Yeah, I mean, besides experiencing Camp Jened and what that world was like, and seeing disabled young adults as happy, joyous, sexy people having a really, really good time, this, a few, 6 years later, a group of people, a number of people from Jened actually in the Bay Area take over this government office to try to force the Carter administration to issue these regulations that provided civil rights protections. And that went on for about 26 days. And that's an incredible story, and how the Black Panthers got involved and brought in meals every day. And then that was really kind of a springboard for the Americans with Disabilities Act. But yeah, it's Sundance. Why didn't we, people were asking Judy Heumann, it's like, why didn't we know this story? And it's like, well, you got to ask yourselves, yeah, why? Well, how does,
Right.
people don't, I identify culturally as disabled, okay? And
Mhm.
if you have a culture and a community, you do have history. And it is important to know your history. It's important to know that so you kind of know where you've come from and what's possible, and also to have pride in who you are. And I certainly learned a great deal from my elders and my contemporaries about how to think about myself, especially growing up. I'm 65 years old. And so when I was growing up, there was a lot of shame around being disabled simply because you were disabled. And so learning about disability
Right.
pride and the like was just really so important. But I do want to say one thing, Pam, is that our film is just one story, that we really chose to follow this
Right.
camp and these people that came out of the camp and the staff and such, and trace the importance of that camp and how that motivated people in time. And that, oh my gosh, there are just so many other really important stories, other historical stories
Right.
around people of color and such, and their work with the disabled civil rights movement. And there's a whole movement around disability
Mm.
justice that really kind of started here in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
which really looks at disability rights through the lens of people who've been marginalized, LGBTQ,
Right.
people of color. And I'm excited to think about how those films will be coming out and that people will learn about the modern
Yeah.
movement. And hoping I'm going to live a long, long life so I can see those films.
Yeah. That's incredibly exciting. Can you say the name of the organization again? Forward FWD?
FWD hyphen DOC. And we've got a website at fwd doc.org.
Okay.
And we also have a Facebook group of like 400 people. But if you go to our website, there's just a lot of great information there. And, we're trying to become a resource for film festivals and filmmakers, and how to make your films accessible, how to make your festivals
Right.
accessible, how to engage with the disabled
Right.
community. I can't tell you how exciting this is.
Oh, yeah. I downloaded the educator's guide for Crip Camp from your
Great.
From the Crip Camp website.
website because I just thought
Yeah.
from the Crip Camp website, yes, because I felt like this applies to this film and this screening, but it applies to so many other things too. It just makes you a better citizen in your classroom, whether you're the teacher or whatever authority you have. These are all things that, as instructors, we need to think about these sorts of things when we're reviewing things, when we're talking about things. So I appreciate that you guys made that available. I do want to go back to Camp Jened and to this archival footage that you have. It's not every day that you would have the kind of archival footage. It is incredible. It feels like, I mean, archival footage is what allows people to feel like they were there for a place that doesn't exist anymore. And so, how did you get this archival footage to this camp? Who even shot this footage?
Well, in the summer of 71, this group of videographers who are using this relatively new technology of black and white portable video happened to bump into people from Camp Jened at a gas station. And they're known as the People's Video Theater. And they kind of started, hey, who are you guys? Who are you guys? We invited them over to the camp to film our Camp Olympics. And when they got there, after a little bit of time, they were let in, and there had been two of the counselors had gotten the crabs. And so the whole camp was upside down because there were some campers leaving, and the camp, the director was worried that somebody was going to go home with the crabs. And so, there were sheets drying on the quote unquote lawns, if you can call them that. And, anyway, it was just everything was upside down, but it was a great thing to capture. So and in fact, they'd given me the camera one day, and somebody pushed me around camp to do a tour. So when Nicole and I were first talking, I said, I remember this group of hippie videographers coming to camp, and they gave me the camera one day to do a tour. And Nicole says, what? It's like you've been working on this film for over 40 years. But all I could remember at the time was that the word people was in the name of this group. And she was tenacious for about 3 months trying to look in the evening on the internet. And she eventually found this ad in the back of a video magazine that had recently, from back in the day, that had been recently digitized, that said, for sale, this videotape of the crab epidemic at Camp Jeanette for the handicapped, $6.95.
Oh my gosh.
People's Video Theater. And with that information, we wound up tracking down some of the folks. And indeed, these tapes, 5.5 hours worth of them existed, and they were in the process of finally getting them transferred off of the half-inch open reel videotapes. So there's been a lot of luck that happened with our film.
Yeah, it's a treasure trove. And Sara, I'm wondering, it's such, for me, even just having Jim as a friend, seeing him at this camp was kind of incredible. How was it for you to see Jim at the camp? Because one thing I will say, you were such a hottie.
Totally agree.
Jim, you had like that sort of flowing, wavy, blonde hair. And you had this way of looking, yes, except it was longer. And you had this way of looking at the camera, kind of like, oh, I'm shy, but I will really show you a good time. It just like the camera loved you. And I'm wondering, Sara, what was that like to see this footage of Jim in all his teenage glory? What was that like?
It was fantastic. That and seeing the home movies of him as a toddler, like getting the water from the bathtub and
oh yes, that was amazing too. Yes, yeah.
Waving to the camera like, hi. It was his personality already as a child. And then seeing him as this gorgeous teenager. I mean, just beautiful. And seeing people he had told me about, his first girlfriend, Nancy, and seeing Judy Human, who I had met by then through Jim, as this amazing, counselor in her early 20s. All of it was it was like this huge just gift of beautiful stuff and also more insight into kind of his development as a person and growing into the wonderful man he is. It was spectacular. And I think for Jim, I know we've talked about this before, seeing all these people, many of whom who are gone now and who were so instrumental in his life, and especially Nancy, who was his first girlfriend in a really important relationship. So, very, I think, emotionally difficult at times for you, right, Jim?
I realized as we were finishing the film, we were down in Los Angeles doing color correction, and I realized that I was able to visit Camp Jeanette every day working on the film, and I didn't want it to end, and I got this rare opportunity to kind of relive that through this footage. And then in reminiscing with people and getting reacquainted with some folks and, counselors and such. So,
yeah. And even we got to connect with the daughter of somebody who had passed away recently, who's an important part of the film.
Was she in that final scene? When you go back to
Steve's daughter.
Yeah, when you go back to where Jeanette was. That's right.
Yeah, it was that community. He's incredible, and they're a very tight community.
What was his name? Steve
Hoffman.
Yeah.
And talk about a handsome person.
Well, the camera just loved both of you guys. It really did.
Yeah. And also the other thing about that footage is, thank goodness, the People's Video Theater, they were friggin' good camera people. They really did a great job. And their politics were such that they really viewed that new equipment as a way of empowering disempowered communities. So there's a lot of respect in how they're empowering these kids, to what is it you want to film and how do you want to film it? And, thank goodness it wasn't just that the footage was discovered, it's that it was so good.
I mean, I reflected upon relatively early into the edit. I realized, holy moly. I mean, these guys gave us agency. I mean, let alone being, let's say, young adults or teenagers, but people with disabilities. No, I mean, they could have easily come into that camp and kind of said to the camp director, so how are you taking care of these poor, unfortunate people? And it was like, yeah, help us make a film about your camp and stuff. And one of the pivotal moments of the camp section of the film is this roundtable discussion about how we felt about our parents and their overprotectiveness and such. And that was a direct result of us saying to them, we would like to do this. We would like to make a video about how it feels to have overprotective parents. And that wouldn't have happened if they had come in there like a bunch of knuckleheads.
Yeah, that footage it blows me away in terms of just that it was still out there in the world somewhere. And I hadn't even thought about the way that it was shot and that it was shot at all. But the other thing I'm curious about is that you tracked down the one camp counselor, and you did a really great thing to sort of show how working at Gen Ed had affected his life. How did you get in contact with him?
Well, there's actually, first off, there's a number of people from Camp Gen Ed that live in the Bay Area. So the couple, Neil and Denise Jacobson and Capolo Freeman, and there's probably an email tree of about 60 people. And a lot of them are counselors and such.
Okay.
And there had been a West Coast reunion a number of years ago, which we actually had at our house. So we'd been in touch with people, but not that consistently. But really getting connected with Lionel on a much more daily basis almost, and connection, and really, was really quite profound. And when Lionel came out, two other counselors came out with him to our house for the filming. And
wow,
one of them, I didn't really, he was like there after I wasn't planning on us interviewing him, but he said, are you going to be interviewing me? And I kind of, okay, well, let's do it. And he's the one that started talking about it, my first day there. And I get on the bus and it's like, I'm frozen. I don't know what to do. And then someone kind of nudges me out of the way, and that just propels me towards, it was just the perfect observation for people to hear, because it's not like you jump into this and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I can do this. Even myself with a disability, I went to public school. I wasn't around people with disabilities for 10 months out of the year. And it took a little acclimation on my part just to kind of get used to people who were like myself, but different from myself.
Right. Well, that's the other thing that I loved about the camp, is that it felt very integrative in terms of people weren't siloed into their little, what, according to, okay, this is your disability, so you're going to be here, or we're going to have a separate camp for you. And it is amazing to see the empathy and compassion between all of you as a group for one another.
I learned that from people like Judy Human, that you have to have patience and respect. And not everybody is as fluent as you are, Jim. But don't try to rush them. Don't try to fill in the sentence for them. It's just like, just be there. And you could see this, that in that scene I was talking about, this message to parents, where Nancy Rosenblum is not easy to understand, but we gave her the floor. That's not really quite the right way of saying it, but nobody was trying to rush her or anything else. And it took her a while to say what she was trying to say. And although some of us didn't understand a lot of it, Steve Hoffman, who had gone to school with her, understood her well enough to say, I think I know what she's saying. And that was a freaking, when Nicole and I came across that scene, we were looking at that and said, boy, if we could build the camp section up to this moment and make it work, then, we're golden. It was really stunning.
And, about that scene, when we had the raw footage, we shared it with some friends of ours, and I was watching my friend David's reaction. And now, granted, it was uncut, so it was much, much longer. And Nancy goes on talking for a much longer period of time, and we couldn't understand her. But when I saw my friend's hugely high level of discomfort, which is something that people with affected speech deal with all the time, people's discomfort because they can't understand them. Mm-hmm. And he was, I don't see how you can have this in your film. it's going to be really hard for the audience to the point that they'll disconnect. So that was the challenge, right? Building up to the point where the audience was very happy to sit there and listen to Nancy, granted in a shorter section, but to accept that, to listen, to appreciate it, to try to understand her and accept if they couldn't, and then to hear Steve kind of translating for her. But I think that was a huge accomplishment of Jim and Nicole and the editors, so that people were very open to that scene. And many people cite it as kind of a highlight of the film. You know, kudos to them for pulling that off, because that is hard. It's something people are, even people with other disabilities, are extremely, struggle with.
Right.
It also reminded me of something pretty funny, actually, that when we pulled together our first kind of trailer, fundraising trailer, with our editor, and we're thinking we got something really, really great here, and gosh, that's really working. And our editor, Andy Gersh, shows the trailer to his wife, Heather, and she kind of went, "Oh my God, this place looks like a camp of horrors." It was just like she just, and she was right. She was right. We just couldn't see it. We knew too much. But he said, "Oh my God, this place looks like it's dangerous." And, so, this, you're a filmmaker, you know this. It's like
fascinating.
Boy, it's always good to have eyes on what you're doing. And, when we did finally finish this trailer, though, Andy cut $1 million trailer. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I actually just rewatched it yesterday, and
well, it was the fundraising trailer, so I don't think you've seen it.
Oh, maybe I didn't. I saw the one you have on your website, and what cracked me up is that you're really good on camera, Jim. And when you say,
Thank God.
you're probably just going to go to this camp and smoke dope with the counselors, and you're like, sign me up. It was so funny. Well, I appreciated, though, that you did not sterilize this camp in terms of sexuality, in terms of, I can't remember. You guys do get high at some point at camp, don't you? Or am I just imagining that from that line? Okay. But I think that that's another danger when you're telling a story about disability, is that, these people don't have sex lives. They don't have desires, and I thought that that was the brilliance of this Camp Jened footage, is to see. I mean, when you said a camp of horrors, I was thinking like, it was a bunch of horny, smelly teenagers, like all making out and hooking up with each other. Like, I thought that's what you meant, that like, I mean, I've had teenagers and they are very smelly and very horny. So I thought that that's what you
especially when you're a bunch of hippies. But no, actually we were very, very safe and very well looked after, at that camp. But indeed, that's part of it. It's like, Nicole and I, especially talking early on, what are the things that are important for, what are the negative stereotypes, or what are the things that you want to bust, or what are the landmark situations in disability history or modern disability history, and things like the expose that Geraldo Rivera did on Willowbrook State Hospital was a really momentous moment, and talking about our sexuality and talking about, we'd like to get high. And I used to joke that if you're at a party, if you're trying to find the best pot, look for somebody with a disability. They probably have it, So it was, we blew open. We wanted to change. Nicole and I and all of us wanted to change the perception of what it meant to be disabled, both for people with and without disabilities. That was really important. And we heard from a number of people how they felt ashamed, and non-disabled people feeling ashamed about how they had regarded people with disabilities or how we had changed them. And people with disabilities saying, you know what, I learned this pride. It's like, I don't want to hide my disability. And oh my God, if you can accomplish something like that in your life, where you're freeing people's, allowing them to have a really authentic life of their own choosing, or helping them to do that. I mean, wow.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I know that this film has a life far beyond when you released it. Can you talk a little bit about that? There are a couple things in relation to that. I know that, this film was up for awards and that there were some issues with accessibility at some of these award shows. And I really appreciated that, Jim, you went onto a couple of platforms and you took on, was it NBC who was hosting the Emmys?
Well, we were not up for an Emmy Award. We did not qualify for an Emmy because we had gone for an Oscar. And so we had reached out to the Motion Picture Academy pretty early, and they had to pivot because of COVID. It was an incredibly accessible ceremony. Backstage, there was a ramp on the stage. It was live audio described on ABC. And I really was advocating for the Emmy Awards to really do the same thing, and in engaging with the TV Academy. And then they said, look, we don't have any control over this. Talk to CBS. And then that became a whole kind of political back and forth and stonewalling. And it wound up being that I was promised that there was going to be, what I really wanted is to see a ramp to that stage that would tell anybody with a mobility disability that, you were wanted in this community and that it's possible for you to wind up on this stage. And I was promised that was going to happen, and it didn't.
Right.
And I was promised by lawyers. And, this is something I've been working on and fighting, and there's other people that are involved with this now. And I'm going to re-engage with all these folks pretty soon, but I've been taking a little bit of a break. Because this kind of work, this kind of advocacy, you're constantly telling people why you matter. You're kind of telling people, you have to explain to people why you shouldn't be discounted.
Right.
And like we're being told, well, why do we need a ramp if no one has said they needed a ramp? That's not the point. Or we're in compliance. That doesn't matter.
Right.
And I got to tell you, the most hypocritical thing was the head of the Television Academy walking on that up 4 steps to this platform to say how they were inclusive of everybody, including the disabled, where that set was a tribute to inaccessibility. Was just maddening.
Right.
So you got me on my soapbox. Thank you.
No, I know. The other thing that you realize too is that these issues of accessibility, again, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, that it's not always evident who's going to need that ramp. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They probably had so many people in their audience who need that ramp. And I don't know. It's also...
Yeah, I got thought you're going to ask people to have to self-identify, or to... Anyway, it was just like... And look, I think any marginalized group has to have these fights for recognition. And remember when we had Oscars So White? It's like... So it isn't just about ramps or Braille or audio description. It's about how inclusive we are. And look, if you want to do something, it's possible. And I think that there's built-in ableism. I think there's built-in racism, institutionalized racism, homophobia that acts. And you have to have people out there pushing and getting in people's faces about these things to saying, look, I'm not represented here, and it's nothing I'm doing wrong, and you guys are part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm very curious. Would you guys be up for making another film? Sara, what about you?
I thought that I'd be done after Crip Camp. I'm in my late 60s, but I am executive producing another documentary that I'm very excited about, but it's a different role. So I'm hands-on and I'm very involved, but it's not all on my shoulders, and it's with a great team. And it's very gratifying to use some, and part of it it's partially a disability themed film, but it's more than that too. It's very gratifying. It feels great. And there are other films that I'm just, kind of advising on here and there. So it's great to use what I learned on Crip Camp and a lot of the relationships I made too that continue with funders and distributors and others. So I'm doing that. And then Jim is very busy.
I'm involved a little bit with this film also, called Fire Through Dry Grass. But I'm also been wanting to work in scripted. television to be specific around disability and humor. And that's not exactly an easy sell, but I have a writing partner, and she and I have had some traction in the last few months, and so we're optimistic that maybe we might get this show actually picked up by somebody, but what we shall see. But that's really my interest, is in writing and really, working in television.
Well, that's very exciting for both of you. And yeah, I would say that anybody who watches Crip Camp and doesn't see disability and humor, I don't know. I don't know what they missed. But
Pam, one thing on that was the best thing about, one of the many wonderful things about the premiere at Sundance. It was a huge theater and it was packed, and we were holding our breaths to see if the very first and second laughs, if they would land. And I didn't realize we were holding our breaths until they did land. And you hear all, what was it, 1,500 people? It was a huge theater, 100 people maybe, laughing. And it kind of started, and then kind of other people felt, okay, we have permission to laugh. It was the best feeling, just the best feeling. I mean, it really incredible to be with a big audience and realize, oh, they're getting it. It's working. Yeah,
we had never seen it with a large audience. With that audience, we just had some small screenings. So yeah, boy, it was amazing.
It's truly one of my favorite films of all time.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you both for making it. It's I think on every level, it's got the power to impact the industry, how people see it, but just on a personal level, it was just like the most incredible evening of movie watching I've had in a very long time. So thank you guys for all the work that went into this. And thanks for being on the show and talking about it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
I'll always be deeply indebted to Nicole and to Sara and all of the people that worked their butts off on our film, and the Obamas, who were executive producers in Higher Ground. And, there's so many people. If you're not in this industry, you don't know how many people can wind up getting really having profound effects on a film. So anyway, it takes a village, right? And thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. This was fun.
And it's nice to see you guys too. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm so grateful to Sara Boulder and Jim LeBrecht for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds and sharing their experience of being both romantic and creative partners. If you haven't seen the film Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, you can see it on Netflix. Stop what you're doing and watch it right now. You won't regret it. You can also learn more about it on cripcamp.com. That's CRIPCAMP.com. There's a really good educational curriculum that you can download if you want to show this film in a class. If you want to learn more about Jim LeBrecht, Google him and you'll find some really good interviews he's given about the film. That's JIM, new word, LEBRECHT. You can also Google him as James LeBrecht. If you'd like to get an idea of how many films Sara Boulder worked on before producing Crip Camp, look her up on imdb.com. Her name is spelled Sara, new word, Bolder. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Gulanian. The two additional pieces of music used in the intro were by Remus and Ketsa. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating.
First impressions can take as little as 6 seconds to make. In a world where things just seem to be speeding up, how do we slow down enough to get past that narrow 6-second window and really learn about each other? In our society's rush to consume information as quickly as possible, whose amazing and unique stories don't we get to hear? That's where the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast comes in. Join me, Carolyn Keel, as I uncover stories of life and creativity, triumph and struggle, with a focus on neurodiversity. Starting in 2022, I'm featuring neurodivergent guests on my show, including those who are autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, have ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, and more. Their stories of entrepreneurship, creativity, and advocacy will shatter misconceptions, break stigma, and showcase the vibrance and diversity of this community. And, as a neurodivergent person myself, I'll be sharing my own story as well. To listen, go to beyond6seconds.net or follow the show in your favorite podcast player.